All right, I understand maybe you got down to card number 55 or so. You will remember in your previous studies that you talked about the man who'd been crippled 38 years, and the Lord obviously healed him. Those around the pool, you remember, waiting for the water to be stirred, and he couldn't get in there quick enough, and wouldn't anybody particularly help him get there. And so the Lord provided the healing for him. But it happened to be on a Sabbath day, so it created a stir. And those Jewish leaders who already were looking for ways to have Jesus ensnared seemed to be blinded to the fact that this man had been lame for 38 years and now could walk. And they weren't concerned about the good that had been done. They were saying, this is where we have him. He's not supposed to do anything on the Sabbath day. And that's really not even accurate itself, is it? In the Old Testament law, you were allowed to do things on the Sabbath day. You couldn't do things to promote yourself or gain materially, but if the oxen was in the ditch, you didn't let the oxen suffer for a day. You had permission to go and get the oxen out. That wasn't for you, it's for the oxen. And this wasn't. This is one of those situations. This is more than an oxen, isn't it? This is a man who'd been crippled all of his life, and now he's been healed. So you remember that discussion that you had. In similar fashion, the withered hand that Jesus miraculously healed, and again, we're talking about a Sabbath day situation, and so they look for ways to entrap Jesus. And he doesn't do anything accidentally. Now, there are occasions where people wouldn't have been healed had they not gone to a little effort to get Jesus' attention. But Jesus never did anything accidentally. We'll see in some of these other miracles that he specifically says that he came to do the Father's will. And so anything he's doing is to demonstrate this is the Father's will. Not that everybody be healed miraculously, but everybody come to know his Son. The means that God's going to save mankind. That's the purpose of it. He came to do his Father's will. And so when you look at that, even the healing on the Sabbath day was to force them to look a little deeper. Sometimes we can get to be real sticklers about points of truth and say, well, that's a violation of the Scriptures. And we ought to always be conscious. If we violate the Scriptures, then the Scriptures are going to judge us in the last day. But sometimes in the midst of that, we don't realize, okay, how I address that needs to be done so in such a way that I can secure that soul, somebody teaching something they shouldn't, to teach them the way of the truth more perfectly, but that you do that with love and respect, so that the whole point of the truth is to save the soul. And sometimes we're so focused on making sure they know that we know the truth and they don't, that we don't retrieve the soul. And so that's kind of like the Sabbath day, isn't it? They're so sticklers about you're not supposed to do anything on the Sabbath day, not supposed to do anything on the Sabbath day, that what did he do on the Sabbath day? And could that be an application of an oxen being in a ditch? Well, he'd been in a ditch 38 years, and he just now came in contact with the Lord. Why wouldn't the Lord heal him? So Jesus forced them to say, are there stipulations on the Sabbath day that could take place? And he wanted them to go deeper than that and say, who is the Lord of the Sabbath day? Jesus. He's the Word. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And so he has the authority to do that. Ultimately, he's getting them to the point where they would have to recognize that the one who spoke everything into being, the one who was promised to be the seed of woman, the one who was to be born of a virgin, the one who was to be the Lamb to take away the sins of the world, has the authority and power to do those things, to get them to the point where they understand it's not just about the miraculous healing, it's about the power and might of God and his means of salvation. So remember that. These are fascinating, miraculous things to us. But all the miracles were done, as John records in John chapter 20 and verse 30 and 31. We don't know all the miracles of Jesus. Many other signs truly did Jesus in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you might have life through his name. So every one that we have were recorded for that reason, so that you and I might believe that Jesus is the Son of God. And that through that we recognize we have life through his name. And so our fascination of a particular miracle is okay, but it's not disconnected from why it was performed and why he didn't heal everybody. He took that occasion when the disciples were following him and crowds were gathered and say, I'm the one. I'm the Christ. I'm the Messiah. I'm the means of salvation. And so keep those things in mind. Those two particularly were controversial because they were so fixated on him doing it on the Sabbath day that they couldn't get over it. And sometimes we get so fixated on a particular point that we disregard everything else around us.
Hey, Dad.
Yo.
I don't know where you may or may not want to bring this up, but we did talk about how from the beginning they didn't want to accept that Jesus was doing these things from God. And so the whole purpose was to burn the messenger to bring grace.
That's right.
Forgive us of sins. And that when they rejected that was the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit. When they witnessed those miracles but did not see he was fulfillment of that.
That's a good point. And
I didn't know when you might address that.
Hopefully we'll connect that in just a moment when we get to the Jesus stealing bringing calm and peace and stilling the waters during the storm. That here he is. But in John chapter 8, in reference to what Paul just said, in John chapter 8 verse 24, Jesus said, "If you believe not that I am he, you will die in your sins." And so as Paul said, the miracles that he did was to demonstrate to everybody, I am who I claim to be. Can't do the things that I'm doing if I'm not empowered to do that. In fact, you remember Nicodemus, that Jewish leader in John chapter 3, acknowledged that. He called him rabbi, teacher. He said, "Teacher, we know that you are a teacher sent from God, for no man can do those things that thou hast done except God be with him." Now, he had not necessarily made the stretch at that time saying, not only is God with you, but you're God, that you're the Son of God. Now, that was still a mind-boggling thing, even to his disciples on occasion. But that's a good point. Who could do those kind of things if God had not empowered them to do it? And so they were constantly reminded. They got in a bind, and would finally say, remember when he healed the blind man, they said, "Who healed you?" And he said, "I don't really know who he was." But he described him, and they said, "He's a sinner." And the blind man said, "I don't know if he's a sinner or not, but I don't know how a sinner could perform a miracle. Kind of explain that to me, All I know is I was blind, and now I see." That's pretty simple, isn't it? He'd been blind all of his life, and so he knows now he can see. Now, these folks physically could see, but they were absolutely blind. Here is the Son of God standing before them, demonstrating, as Paul mentioned, demonstrating his power, his divine power, by healing this man that everybody knows had been blind all of his life. And all they could see was, well, he didn't really have permission to do all that. Who gave him that power? And the blind man pretty much said, "You figure all that out yourself." I don't know how he could be a sinner and do miraculous things. And so they're trying to give Satan credit for that. Well, he's of Satan. He's of Beelzebub. And Jesus took him on with that, said, then how is it that Satan has that kind of power against God? Anyway, good point. And then the centurion in card number 4, the centurion had great faith, and the Lord acknowledged his faith. Centurion would be someone who's over 100 soldiers, and so significant person in the Roman context, and he was a Gentile. And yet, because of his faith, Jesus said he'd not seen so great a faith in all of Israel in Matthew chapter 8, verse 10. When he says Israel, he's saying here's a people who should immediately believe in me. They've had the prophets. They've had the law of Moses. Everything was in place for them to know that the Messiah is coming. In fact, you remember in John chapter 1 when John the Baptist is preaching, they come out and ask John, are you the one? Are you the Christ? Are you the Messiah? So it lets you know they were looking for one. They were anticipating him coming. And so with that, then they said, who are you? He said, John said, no, I'm not the Messiah. I'm not the Christ. I'm not that prophet. Then who are you? And he said, I'm just the voice of one crying in the wilderness. He's preparing the way for the Lord. But once he introduced the Lord, they still were not prepared to accept him. So when he has this Gentile saying, look, I know who you are. I know the power you have, and you just speak and it's going to be done. He said, I haven't seen so great a faith in all of Israel. Israel should have had that kind of faith, but they didn't. And so the centurion's faith kind of foreshadowed the acceptance of the Gentiles. They're going to come from the east and the west. When you go all the way back to Isaiah chapter 2, it describes the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains. And it said all nations will flow unto it. And out of Zion said, go forth the law of the Lord. All nations shall flow unto it. And so it's not going to be just Jewish people, but it's going to be all nations. So I think that's kind of what you covered maybe the Sunday and Wednesday at least, got most of that. So we want to look now at those that Jesus raised from the dead. The widow of Nain, that's one of those interesting situations where no one's seeking Jesus out. A lot of the miracles that were performed, then they were performed by Jesus because people came to him. They heard about him. They came out to him. But here's a widow about to bury her only son. And Jesus sees this procession, this, we would say, a funeral procession, where they're going out to bury a body. And when Jesus sees her, he has compassion on her. And he says, in reference to that, look, begin at verse 11 of Luke chapter 7.
We did read that.
Okay.
In the class. We didn't
All right.
go into great depth in it, but we did read the text, just so you know.
All right. And so I'll read it for me and not for y'all. You've already read that. And but it came to pass the day after that he went into a city called Nain, and many of the disciples went with him, and much people. And when he came nigh to the gate of the city, behold, there was a dead man carried out, and the only son of his mother, and she was widow, and much people of the city was with her. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her, and said unto her, weep not. And he came and touched the bearer, and they that bare him stood still. And he said, young man, I say unto thee, arise. And he that was dead sat up, and began to speak. And he delivered him to his mother. And there came a fear on all, and they glorified God, saying that a great prophet is risen up among us, and that God hath visited his people. So when you look at this, again, she didn't come to Jesus and say, raise my son, she's going like the rest of us would to bury our dead. There's a process to it. Then, they had people carrying this young man's body, and they were carrying him outside the gate. And when Jesus sees that, he knows this is a funeral procession, and this happened to be the only son of this widow. A little background there that you and I would be familiar with is that God designed the family so that they could take care of each other. You know, husband's going to take care of his wife, and father's going to take care of his children, and then he had it layered that if something happened to someone, in the Old Testament, if a man died, then his brother would take his wife. To not trying to create a harem is saying somebody got to take care of her. He's deceased, somebody got to take care of her, and particularly to raise up seed. But that was to care for them. You remember when Naomi went back from Moab after her husband and her 2 sons died? She was much like this woman. She didn't have any male caregivers. And so she went back to her homeland, and in her homeland it was designed so that those next of kin could take the property, but with the property came the care of Naomi. And there was a process to that. But here's a woman who no longer has a husband, and now the only son she has is he's died. So she'd be much like Ruth was. She didn't have anybody to take care of her. And so she went back to the homeland, and nothing else. Ruth went into the fields to glean like a stranger. And just whatever fell off the wagons and whatever was left in the fields, that's what they lived off of. And so this could be a very desperate situation. Not just that this is a grieving mother, but this is a woman in a very desperate condition now. She didn't have anybody to take care of her only son. And so the Lord has compassion on her. Not that she's just a weeping mother, but she's a weeping widowed mother that's in a desperate context. And so he heals her son. And we could spend some time talking about what a fascinating experience that must have been. The hopeless context of her heart, of knowing she needs to show respect to her son and go through this grieving process, but likely had no idea what the future would hold, where her care was going to come from. And yet her son sits up and speaks. And so, fascinating miracle. And Jesus initiated it, not out of request, not because somebody brought him to that widow, or the widow sent messengers like other people had, said, come heal my son or my daughter or my servant. He just sees the context of life, and he interrupts that by performing a miracle. And so that's the widow of Nain. And also, I don't know if y'all talked about it or not, but you can see sometimes it's pronounced Jairus, and sometimes I'll usually say Jairus, his daughter. He's very compassionate toward the healing of his daughter. He makes a special request of the Lord because of that. See if I can find my notes here. But that's in Luke chapter 8 and verse 41 to 56.
Dad, before you go into this one, Joey talked a lot about compassion in his lesson last week.
Oh, good.
And then, I made a few references to different places where it said Jesus had compassion on the people, and then somebody brought up like even the food, feeding the multitude. So Jesus showed compassion.
Yep.
He initiated it. He was always looking for a way to make people's life, give people life. Let them have abundant life.
That's great. And that distinguishes Jesus. He's compassionate. So when he talks to people about compassion, there's already a standard of compassion that's set. And Joy would have talked to you about that. That's why it was easy for the Lord to address the lawyer in the story of the Good Samaritan. When he said, what's the first and great commandment? And he gives them the First commandment is second is like unto it, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. And there was a qualifying question. Who is my neighbor? Well, these people that Jesus is showing compassion to, are they his physical neighbor? No, he's wanting to say, okay, I don't want to be compassionate unless I have to, kind of what the lawyer's saying, isn't it? You tell me where I need to be compassionate. And Jesus is just compassionate. That's who he is. That's what he does. That's how he views us. He cares about us. And the lawyer's just saying, who should I care about? Who's going to cost me money? Where am I going to be obligated? And compassion can't exist where there's just obligation. That's duty. That's responsibility. But that's not compassion. And so, did y'all read this context too? Did you? Okay. So as you look at Jairus here in chapter 8, verse 41, and it said, and Jesus answering said, no, that's 9. No wonder it didn't look right. Verse 41 of chapter 8. And behold, there came a man, Jairus, and he was a ruler of the synagogue, and fell down at Jesus' feet and besought him that he would come in at his house, for he had one only daughter, about 12 years old, and she lay dying. But as he went, the people thronged him. So you have this, again, in contrast to the widow of Nain. She wasn't seeking out Jesus. She was grieving for her deceased son. But here's a man who has a dying daughter, and he has heard about Jesus, and he knows this is a possibility. If I can get to Jesus and I can ask him, he can heal my daughter. And so he takes the initiative to do that. But there are throngs of people. This is not the only one making request of Jesus. You and I, if in our medical world, if somebody says Mayo Clinic, people like immediately, okay, we're talking about the Minnesota or the Houston, Texas. We hear some expertise, some advancements in research and procedures have been done. And if they have been successful in addressing a particular disease or some kind of context of life that has robbed people of life, and now they've been successful in prolonging life, man, the first question we ask, have you been to Mayo yet? They've done some really interesting things and been successful in this particular area. You been to Mayo yet? Well, it's not that we wouldn't get medical care here, but hey, they've proven they know how to do things there. And so Jesus has performed. We started out, and Paul's first comment was that this was to demonstrate that Jesus was the Son of God. Well, people are paying attention, aren't they? Here's somebody that can heal. And so he gets there and says, my daughter's dying. Can you come and heal her? But he's being thronged by everybody else who's got a request of him, And in the midst of that, somebody touches the hem of his garment. And he knows it. He can feel it. Something left him. And we look at that and we understand how important it is for us to appreciate the fact that Jesus would take the time to provide the healing. That becomes important for us to know. But when you, let me see if I can find my place here. Anybody got questions or comments while I'm finding my...
Once again, he says that her healing is in proportion to her faith.
All right.
And he does that on more than with one miracle where he engages them, but he wants to see the demonstration of their faith. So it's not just a handout. And we talked about praying in faith, nothing wavering. That's difficult to do. Sometimes we don't get what we want. Maybe we're not really trusting like we need to, or as obedient we need
I think that's true. And something else that may be a little subtle here, but to demonstrate why Jesus did his miracles. We know that these are written that we might believe that Jesus is Christ, the Son of God. But we're told that he did many other miracles. But you see that it wasn't just to heal people. Or else he'd just let her touch the hem of his garment. Everybody touched the hem of his garment and be healed. Somebody touched the hem of his garment. And maybe because of the context that Paul just described, maybe her faith, Jesus said, "Who touched me?" Now he draws attention to somebody has touched the hem of my garment. And now Paul hears these throngs of people and has this conversation with this woman. She receives healing. Who gets the focus placed on them? Jesus does. Not just, okay, I'm going to heal everybody and I'll mail you this handkerchief and you hold this handkerchief and it's been blessed and you're going to be healed. But send me money to pay for this handkerchief. That wasn't how Jesus operated. But because she went to enough effort to say, if I can just get close enough. Her faith was, if I could just get close enough to touch anything about him, then I might receive healing. That's what initiated the contact. Then we pick up in verse 49 with Jairus again. Throngs of people. He can't really get to Jesus and get his attention, get him to his daughter. And yes.
That's not always the case that the one getting healed has to have faith.
Right. That's right. That's right.
Just now.
Yep.
Lazarus.
Yep.
And others.
Yep.
He's asking them to not lose hope, to believe that this is going to happen, because he came intriguing to find help for his daughter. But his daughter's not the one believing.
That's right. That's an excellent point. Both with the touching of the hem of the garment, it's not that you had to have faith. It's just her faith is what caused her to go to that extra effort, and for the Lord then to call attention to this matter so that people would know that he had the power and therefore the Son of God. And with Jairus' daughter, the daughter didn't have faith at all. She's dying. But her father goes to the effort to go to the one who can bring about the healing. And what?
Faith he hadn't seen anywhere.
Did what?
Jesus even commended him and said that. Jesus said, I haven't seen such a great faith.
Yep.
It's all visible. So,
Yep.
his
Yep.
faith was what brought him there too.
That's right. It's not that we don't have to have faith. It's just sometimes people, modern day folks who claim to be able to perform healing will blame it on us if we can't be healed because we didn't have faith. Jesus healed folks that didn't have any knowledge of him and didn't go to any effort to do that, but because of who he was. We could go back and rehearse a lot of that. But those are good points. Verse 49, and when he had yet spake, there cometh one of the rulers of the synagogue's house, and this is Jairus, saying unto him, Thy daughter is dead, trouble not the master. And when Jesus heard it, he answered him, saying, Fear not, believe only, and she shall be made whole. So the daughter's faith is not involved here. It's the father's faith. Again, he went to this effort to come, and in the process of Jesus being thronged and this delay taking place, he gets news that his daughter is deceased. And so that becomes important for us to remember. These are people that Jesus raised from the dead. Did a lot of miracles, but these are ones where life and death, and that is death that occurred. And we just mentioned the woman who touched the hem of the garment. She's a little later in your cards, but it's in this context where Jairus' request is interrupted because of her. There's a context where we've often read it. It's one of my favorite stories where Jesus is out on the sea and a storm comes up and he's asleep. It's listed in Matthew chapter 8 and in Luke chapter 8. But I want us to go to Mark's account because Mark says not only was he asleep, but he was asleep on a pillow. I'm at the point where I carry my pillow with me where I go, And so that kind of got my attention. He was asleep on the pillow. I don't know if it's his pillow or just a pillow in the boat, but Likely it was just a pillow in the boat because it said he had no place to lay his head, so it sounds like he didn't carry the pillow with him. But I just think that's an interesting insight. To me, that would be, not only is he asleep, he is really asleep. He's down in the boat, he's asleep, and there's a storm that comes up. And Jesus ends up stealing this storm. He calms it. But when you look at Mark chapter 4, beginning at, I think it's verse 37, it says, let's go back up to verse 36. And when they had sent away the multitude, they took him even as he was in the ship, and there was also with him other little ships. And so the ship they're in and other little ships, and they're out in the sea. And there arose a great storm of wind and waves, and beat upon the ship, and so that it was now full. And he was in the hinder part of the ship, asleep on a pillow. And there they awake him, and say unto him, Master, carest thou not that we perish? And he arose and rebuked the winds, and said unto the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And he said unto them, Why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith? And they feared exceedingly, and said to one another, What manner of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him? Now these are his disciples, and they're still struggling with this. The miracles were done that you might believe that he is the Son of God. And they acknowledge that with their lips. We know that thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. But wasn't really sure what all that meant. And now they're out on the sea, and these are real. It not only said there was a storm, there was a great storm. This wasn't just, well, the wind's getting up a little bit. It was beating on the boat. And so got everybody's attention. It's beating on the boat so that it might do some damage to the boat. And it's okay for the boat to be in the water, but don't want the water in the boat. But it's saying there's water getting in the boat. And the waves are tumultuous. And so this is just something, and the one they're following around and the one they're seeing performing these miracles is down in the hinder part of the boat, asleep. And their question to him was almost rebuke, wasn't it? What are you doing sleeping? You don't care about us? Well, did they care about him? They knew what he'd been doing. They knew all the throngs of people. They knew how weary he must be. When we care about each other, say, shh, your daddy's asleep. Your mama's been up all night with the baby. You need to be quiet, let her rest. It's kind of like some of the husbands like, well, but the baby's awake. Go wake mama up. I don't want to deal with this baby. It's like, here's a storm. Look, go wake him up. What's he letting us be out here in this storm for? And when you put yourself in that context, when Jesus is awakened, and they're describing this hysteria, it says he rebuked, in that context, he said he rebuked the wind. You see, the ones who spoke everything into being can say, stop. What's the wind going to do? It's going to stop. Why? He controls the wind. Are you paying attention? The disciples, are they paying attention? Do you not care that we're going to perish out here? And here is the one who created the winds, said, stop. What do the winds do? Well, they stop. Then he says to the sea, be still. Ever told your child, be still? What do you mean? Be still. Quit wiggling around, jumping around. Be still. Well, he created all these things. Can he say, be still? He did. What happened? Calm. Now, I've not always been that successful with my children, not always calm. But you see that the context is, who is this man? It said they were afraid, said, who can do that? We'd say maybe in a flippant way, who does that? Well, the one who spoke everything into being can do that. But you see, since we've made our way through the Bible looking at all the miraculous things, we know also that he was there when the children of Israel were panic-stricken because the Egyptians are now pursuing them, and the only thing they could see was the Red Sea and the Egyptian army. Not real good options, are they? Go drown yourself in the sea, or just take the beating and go back as slaves. And you look at Exodus chapter 13, or Exodus chapter 14 and verse 13, and he says to Moses, you tell the people to be still. What do you say to the sea? Be still. So you tell the people, be still. There's this wave of anxiety, and we should have just died there. Why do we come all the way out here? Going to die in this strange place. Nobody's going to know where we're buried. And what's this all about? And he said, you tell them to be still and see the salvation of the Lord. You see, it wasn't just the winds and the waves that Jesus calmed. Once he calmed them, he needed his disciples to be still. You don't care that we perish? What are they thinking now when they see the wind stop at his speaking? What kind of man is this that even the winds obey him? Well, why wouldn't they obey him? He created them. They're fearful, saying, wow. Here we are thinking we're going to drown, and we wake this man up, and he just speaks. Specifically rebukes the wind, and it obeys him. And now they're standing there in this calm sea that once frightened them. Jesus wanted them to be still and see the salvation that he could provide. You had something, Billy Wayne?
Talk about this sleep. He's either sleeping and getting wet, or he's on the back of the boat, he's on the top part, getting wet from the thing.
Yes, right.
That's
right.
The boat's full. It
That's
sounds
right.
like
That's
it's
right.
full of water.
That's right.
So if he's in the bottom part of the boat, he's sleeping in water.
That's right. Spoken like a true fisherman, Billy Wayne said. If Jesus is down in the boat and there's already, the waves are already getting water in the boat, Jesus already knows, that's the storm is going on, though he's asleep, but you can't get away from it. If it's in the boat, he's down in the lower part of the boat. Where's the water going to go? It's likely going to go down in the lower part of the boat. But why would Jesus be worried on the sea? Yo.
In the Exodus account, he told them to not be afraid before he told them to be still.
Yep.
And so he rebukes his disciples for their fearfulness, and also he tells them to be calm. But he had not performed a miracle like that up to that point. He had told Peter about the drought fishes that almost sank 2 boats. He turned the water to wine. Pretty much every other miracle had been a personal thing. And I think it would probably be easy to think, okay, well maybe he's got some kind of knack for something. He's got some special gift. Sometimes placebo, people can convince themselves that they're well and actually get well. But this is Mother Nature. This is
Yep.
nature in its fullness, and it's responding to his very command. So
And it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. Yeah. And you not overwhelming to the one who created it, but for those who have to live in it, here we are. This is too much. And out of fairness, Paul points out maybe we should realize they hadn't fully been grounded in some of these things because he's early on in his ministry. But interesting context, going back to that before the second bell rings, going back to that context of the Israelites, and he told them to be still, but then it told Moses to stretch his rod out, and when he did, it said the Lord sent a strong east wind. and he parted the waters. There's that wind again. What did the Lord say? Blow that water back. What's the wind going to do? Going to blow the water back. That's a pretty strong wind, isn't it? You're going to blow the water back. And so we don't miss it. And sometimes we study and we pick up this and we pick up that and we're fascinated by that. But when you weave it all back together, in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, it said that Jesus was that rock that made sure they got across that Red Sea. He was that rock. And it talked about them being under the cloud and in the sea. It said it was Jesus. Who is it that tells the wind, stop? In Mark chapter 4. It was Jesus. Who is it that tells the wind, blow that water back at the Red Sea? Well, it's Jesus. He's the Word. If God is speaking, then it's the Word. And who's the Word? In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. By Him were all things made, without Him was not anything made that was made. And you and I ought to take great comfort in that, to have that knowledge and that understanding and say, these miracles are written that we might believe. We're kind of out on the storm of life sometimes, isn't it? It gets pretty overwhelming. It may not be literal water or literal storms that we're facing, but we face storms of life. Does Jesus care whether we perish or not? He does. Does He have the power to see us through? He does. These miracles are done, so we believe that. All right. Good to be home. Appreciate your comments.